Welcome back. This is Knack. We've got a project going today. We're going to be making a two-handed mace. Here's the blank right here. Worked on this on the lathe, and it looks pretty good. Nice tapered handle here. It's not too thick up at the top. I built a nice pommel out of a tagua nut. Take a look at that. Looks pretty good. And this spacer here is made out of figured walnut. And I've just been forging the pieces that are going to be going on the head of the mace. Forged them. They're basically set up already, the shape that I want, because they are a railroad spike. We're going to do 3 of them. And the only thing I've been doing really is changing the tip orientation. Just pointed it down. And then I peened them. I peened the entire sides, all of the sides. Put some nice dimples in there, you can see. And we're going to put 3 of them on, going around in a circle on the top here. It'll make a nice little effect, I think. That'll give you an idea of what we're looking at. So it should be kind of fun. We're going to pin each one of these with 3 pins each. But we've got some machining to do first to make sure that these are going to fit properly. So let's head down to the shop and get started. Alright, a little bit of explanation here. You can see that we're using the belt grinder. And basically what I'm doing is cutting a trough on the side of those spikes that's going to go up against the shaft of the mace. And obviously the shaft of the mace is quite a bit bigger than this contact wheel that you see here. The shaft of the mace is 1 3/4 inches, whereas this is, let's see, 3/4 of an inch, or maybe it might be even an inch there. But regardless, it's smaller, so you'll see me flipping the spikes, which basically gives me 2 troughs side by side, which it's going to be 1 trough in the end, but it's got a little mound in the center. But this gets us very close and fairly precise on the outside edges of that trough. So this was a great way to start. I'm going to put on the 2-inch wheel here in just a second, you'll see. And it just doesn't make sense to use it. I was going to try and cut off some up towards the head of the spike there, but it just isn't going to work. So we end up trying to use this flex shaft grinder here in just a second that's attached to my scroll saw, as you can see here. And I really intended this to work. It's the first time I got a chance to use the flex shaft grinder on this tool. It's a fairly new tool for me, but I only needed it for the scroll saw. It just was a bonus, if you will, to have the flex shaft grinder, but that does not work. That flex shaft grinder was garbage. So we ended up having to take a trip to the hardware store. I bought a little flex shaft grinder for the Dremel tool, and this works quite a bit better. Quite a bit better indeed. And the grinding wheels that I found are actually 1 3/4 inches around. So Providence there. It turns out to be perfect, and that's going to help us complete that trough. So that these will slide up against the shaft of the mace quite perfectly. So it was really nice that worked out. And let me tell you, that flex shaft grinder, the difference between those two is something else. Let's get some music and we'll be right back. Alright, we're wrapping this step up, and it's ready to go back to the belt grinder here in just a moment. I can't believe how well that Dremel shaft worked. Really, really nice. The only problem with having to go to the hardware store during the workday is, for me, it's a 30-minute drive to the nearest hardware store. And that is no fun. It takes an entire hour, plus the time that you spend there. So, I mean, it took a lot out of the day there, but we still get quite a bit done today. And here on the belt grinder, we're going to be sanding this down perpendicular to that groove that we just cut. And we really got to get that flat and make sure that it's straight. And yeah, I do it by eye, but let me tell you, I've got a pretty good eye for perpendicular for some odd reason. I make some slight errors, but I'm able to correct that. And then I got a way to test it, and it turns out that the head of that hammer, I was looking for things that I could use. I thought I might have to turn a template to use for testing to make sure that pieces were looking right. But it turns out the head of that hammer is actually the exact same size as the shaft of our mace there, so that was pretty nice as well. So test these guys out, make sure they're nice and flat, and they're starting to fit really, really well. We just need to make sure and take out the corner, the edge in there. Can't do that on this machine. It removes too much material too quickly. So we're going to take it back to that Dremel tool here in just a moment. So you get to see me finish that out. We'll go ahead and listen to another song here for just a bit, and I'll be back with you with our heat treating step, and that's going to be quite fun. All right, let the fire begin. This is the fun part indeed. Firing up the forge. For safety and just for mechanical purposes, I light a fire in there with paper first. That's why I have that little blowtorch there. Light that sucker up. It's safer that way, and it's a little bit easier. It's hard to keep it lit while you're turning the propane on. But this thing will melt steel. I mean, I can put a crucible in there and have liquid steel. It's a really, really hot little furnace. I'll show you a little bit about it here in just a little bit. But I've got it cranked up right now. We're going to be heating this railroad spike up, the first one. There's our bucket of oil. We're going to be quenching it in. Now, I didn't heat the oil for the first one, kind of on purpose. I didn't want to have the oil end up being too hot by the third one because this is really hot steel. You can see it getting quenched there. Well, and it's a lot too. And since it's so thick, it holds that heat for quite a bit longer. So that oil is actually quite hot already after having done the first one. First one has been heat treated, hardened at least. We're going to temper it back. I don't actually show that step. I do that in my oven in the kitchen. And so it's not super exciting to watch the oven go for 2 hours. But second one going in, we've got this one heated up almost all the way here in just a minute. We'll pull it out and get this one quenched as well. I'm going to give you a different view for the third one, which will be a little bit fun. But yeah, this it works really good. I let it make sure that it's at a pretty solid temperature. And that one actually, I think I probably let it get a little bit too hot, unfortunately. I should have turned the furnace down a little bit too fast. But regardless, in the end, I know these turned out well. The finish on them is going to be, it's really nice. Hardness sounds about the same when you tap them, so they're looking good. Here's the furnace. You can see I got the propane and a shop vac running into those metal pipes there in the back. And that's how that works. It actually works really well. And here's the third one. We'll go ahead and get that quenched. And you can see how long it takes to cool this sucker down. I mean, this is at 600% speed here. And after I tempered them, I put them in vinegar to make sure that scale is going to come off really easy. And here it is in the evening now. The scale just comes right off after you soak them in vinegar for a little while. And I just wire brush all that off, and it leaves the patina on there. It's just a perfect shiny gray patina, unbelievable. You could almost do without buffing. I mean, obviously I'm going to buff this up at the end, but could almost do without buffing. It's really quite nice. So we're going to be just wire brushing these for a moment, and then off to our next step. We'll listen to a song while we get into our next bit, and I'll see you guys in just a moment. Okay, putting some finishing touches on those pieces, those spikes. They're starting to look really good. They're fitting very, very well on the shaft of that mace, as you can see. Nice and flush, that's what we want. So when we attach them, they will be more permanent. The more flush they are, the more better, if you will. Now we're doing a little bit of planning. We got to make sure that we space these evenly, so we do a little bit of math. No big deal. And we're going to space them out. But even with the math, trying to figure out where to put them is actually kind of difficult. So I ended up drawing it out on the paper here. And basically they're going to go in sort of a spiral. There's going to be 9 total holes, and you don't want any of the holes to intersect. So they will be, the pins will be spaced differently on each spike. But they'll be evenly spaced on each spike. And it will kind of go in a spiral there. So next here you can see we're getting set up for where we're going to put the 3 spikes down. We want them to be evenly spaced, and the way we accomplish that is just a little geometry trick. It has to do with intersecting circles and triangles. So it's actually a perfect way to do it. Just make a couple marks there and use your compass and this little square, and we've got our lines where the spikes are going to go directly over. This will get us set up for drilling the holes, and that's going to be our next step here in just a moment. So well, you know what, let's go ahead and grab ourselves a song, and we'll be right back with you on the drill press, of all things, one of my favorite tools. As it turns out, drilling through this shaft actually is quite a chore. We ran into a little bit of trouble getting it set up just perfectly, because this drill press doesn't have a very long depth. In fact, it's just barely enough to get through the shaft, so I had to get it set up just right. And we finally got it set there. Ran through a couple trials, as you saw on the video, but now we've got it set. Got to make sure that these are level as we're drilling the holes. We want them to come out straight through. If you don't have it perfectly level, they won't come out straight through. So we're going to use this little level kind of on its side, if you will. I took it apart and reassembled it in a different way to get it. But you can start to see the holes going in a spiral right here. You can barely see them there up against the napkin, but enough where you can tell, and that's so that that those holes don't intersect. That would weaken the shaft if they intersected. Plus, it would be impossible to pin, because you'd end up having to drill through your pin just to put the second one in. So the holes cannot cross each other. But we'll be ready here in just a bit for our next step. So I'm going to grab another song, and we'll be back with you for some more explanation. before we get too far, this actually does require some explanation. Let me let you know what I'm doing here. I put that drill bit on a hand tool, as you can see, and I'm clamping the spikes where I want them, and then I'm actually re-drilling those holes and just leaving a small mark on the spike, so that way we'll know where we want to drill the holes through the spike. So this is just a marking process. I mean, there's obviously other ways to do this. I just don't have any at this point. You can't stick a marker through there. You can't stick a pencil through that hole. The hole's far too long. So this turns out to be about the easiest thing that I could think of, and it actually worked out quite well. Next thing we're going to do is go ahead and drill the holes in those spikes, and that's always fun to drill through metal, especially after it's been hardened. So we got to use lots of lubrication. But let's get back to that epic dubstep orchestra piece while we drill these holes. And now we're just measuring out pins, and it's actually quite difficult because the pins are going to be very tight in that wood. I didn't ream it out or anything. I want it to be tight. We want this to be as permanent as possible, and so you've got to keep it tight. But getting the pins in and out for measurement was quite a chore, to be honest. And you can see we just used the bandsaw to cut them. Be careful if you're going to be cutting copper, or in this case brass, on the bandsaws, especially a wood bandsaw. If it's a metal cutting bandsaw, that's a different story, but be very careful. That stuff can rip right out of your hands. I just hold it really tight. I probably shouldn't do it, but it is what it is. Right now we're just getting marked up for where the spike heads actually overlap some. I'm going to drill off, or not drill off, but to grind off some of those spike heads so that they don't overlap. They'll be kind of flush together. And to do that, I've got to partially pin it so that I know exactly where it's going to be sitting. And I'm just using some tape and things like that to make sure that we know where those spike heads are going to lay. One of them will be solid, and two of them will be kind of cut to pieces. And you'll see that here in the next clip. So let's grab some music and enjoy watching me fuddle around with tape and pencils before we make it over to the grinder. Alright, we've got the last one all marked up, and we're going to go ahead and get that grinded off. You'll notice that this one kind of comes to a point and it has two spots cut out, and that's so that it will accommodate the other one, or it will accommodate the other two spike heads. So it turned out really nice. There's going to be some small gaps when it's assembled, and that's okay. I just really didn't want them to be too tight while I was peening and pinning these to that shaft. So because if they were clinking up against each other, that could really impede what we were trying to do with the peening. And that happens to be our next step. We're getting these suckers on there. And notice that I'm not using any glue. If you peen it correctly, you really don't need glue, but I am going to be using the the cement, or well, it's the gray JB weld, the steel JB weld. And the reason I chose that is because it's a gray. It's a similar gray to the color of those railroad spikes. So that's going to be on the head. That will help attach it up there, at least give it a little bit extra oomph in its permanence. But this is the peening process for getting them on there. The first two I can do right on my little anvil there. You can see it's just a farrier's anvil, just a small anvil, and I covered it with tape simply to try and minimize the marring on both the wood and the spike itself as I'm peening this. So it actually turned out quite nice. There's just minimal scratches that can be sanded right off. And it took a while. Peening it with such a long pin becomes more difficult because you really have to have them extended out a little over, well, about 1/8 of an inch out on either side. That way, as you get it flush, you push it flush, that it's pushing more and more material into the center. You got to remember that it's an 1 3/4 inches across. That pin is about 1 3/4 inches long. Actually, a little bit longer because you have to take into account the actual part of the spike that it goes through. So it was a lot. There's the second one going on, and the third one I'm going to do down on the floor, as well as kind of the final peening all the way around. Do down on the floor between two hammers. What I do is I'll rest it on a hammer, and then use the other hammer, the peening hammer, on top. So that's the peening process. It turned out really, really well. I've swung it around and things like that, and those suckers are not coming off, and that makes me very, very happy. So we'll get back to some music here, and I'll be back with you talking about our next couple steps. And just as a side note, I will be making a video about attaching bolsters with this similar peening process. Obviously, it's a little bit different here for this mine clearing tool, but for knives, it'll be a nice video. I think it'll be a good tutorial, so do watch out for that. The next step that we're going to be going into here is making a handle. Now, I wanted this piece to have a nice long leather handle around the shaft that's going to extend up right to where that blue mark is, essentially, with a blue tape up at the top. And that's simply because I want the person who's using it to be able to have a seamless handle that will allow them to do chopping motions, much like you would with an axe and things like that. Because it is a two-handed weapon, you want a nice long handle for that. So we're going to be cutting this out of one single piece of leather and doing some work on that. And it'll be kind of fun. It's going to be a nice little piece. And we're going to do some fun dyeing patterns, things like that on it as well. And I think it's going to add a lot to this mace, as well as make it, or give it a nice grip. It'll make it a lot easier to hold on to, and it won't slide through your hands quite as easy. That leather is more rough than that wood. The wood I sanded down so smooth. It's absolutely silken, if you will. And what I'm doing here is I'm cutting the angles that will allow this to sew on to that to the shaft perfectly. We want it to be right on. And as usual, I'm not going to be cutting that with a blade. I only scored it with the knife. Then I'm going to come down to my trusty old grinder and sand it down. So that works really well for me. But we'll go ahead and get some more music and get back to some new steps here. Enjoy, and I'll be right back. All right, back to work, and we're just using the mallet here and some tools. It's the first tool that you're seeing right here is a beveling tool. It's a new one that I got. Actually, I quite like it. It does parallel lines up the bevel, and it looks really good. It makes it look like these shapes are kind of popping, and it almost gives them it makes it look like shine lines, like sunshine lines. You know what you used to do when you were a kid. You draw sunshine lines popping out around the shapes, and these shapes are actually kind of reminiscent of gemstones, mined gemstones, not cut, if you will. So, and that goes along with the fantasy part of this tool. The guys who use this are a race called Eshi, similar to what you read about in other fantasy novels, where people use the word dwarf. Imagine the Eshi similar. They just don't have big beards and drink beer. They're not jolly. The Eshi are quite scary. They're a rough bunch, to say the least. But I'm using a tool here called a scoring tool to put a kind of a knurled pattern on those shapes. It gives it a little bit of character there. And we're going to get ready to dye these up. So we're lightening up a forest green with a little bit of yellow. It turned out pretty good. I realized at this point that the leather is too wet for me to dye this, just the shapes. It would bleed over into the field behind it. So we're going to have to go do our brown first. We're going to do the brown on the dry parts of the leather, and then we'll get back to the green here in just a moment. So we'll finish up that song, and I'll be right back with you with a couple more steps. Okay, well, we're gonna put the final touches on there. Obviously, you can't get super close with those big little puff balls. I can't remember what they're called offhand, but you got to use a little paintbrush. You see, I've got a little paintbrush there to get that dye into those cracks and crevices close by, and right up flush against that green. So, but the dye I think is going on very, very well here. This leather is a really nice piece of leather. It's actually more uniform than most leather that I've had the chance to work with. I guess I spent this one is a higher quality tooling leather, so that's part of the reason why. But and sometimes you buy that, sometimes you don't. It doesn't really matter for a lot of the other things that you're doing. But yeah, in the end, I think that this pattern is going to look kind of cool. I didn't want to do anything too crazy. I didn't want the handle of this mace to detract from the head of the mace. The head of the mace is actually quite cool, and the handle is going to be very long, and I just wanted it to be long. I wanted it to be relatively plain, but you had to add something in there to make it look right. So, and I thought these green gems were a nice touch. But here in just a moment, we're going to attach this to the mace. I actually skipped that step in the video. I didn't video myself. I thought I pressed record, but I didn't, and so I didn't go back in and unsew it so that I could resew it on video, unfortunately. So you'll see me kind of skip a little bit here and there. But basically, we're done here after we get the sheen, which is what I'm going to put on right now, and then it gets attached, and then there's just some minor buffing, and we've got essentially a finished product here. So. And we'll listen to some music, and I'll be right back with you for the final comments and some sneak peeks for some upcoming things. Welcome back, this is Knack, and we've got a completed two-handed mace here. We're going to call it the mine clearing tool. There it is. Take a look at that leather handle. It looks quite nice. I'll give it a nice turn there for you. We added some yellow, if you remember, to that brown. It warmed it up a little bit, and then the same thing to that green. It turned it into more of an emerald green as opposed to a forest green. But here's the surprise. I told you at the beginning that there's a surprise about this, or kind of a secret, and that's it right there. It is a Tagua nut, hollowed out, and I installed an LED light in there. It's got a hidden button on the side, so you can turn it on and off. Yeah, looks good. And if you need to replace the battery, well, it screws off. Looks good. So it's a fantasy piece, obviously, and light spells, if you will, are cast through this particular nut in my world. And so I'll tell you a little bit about this real quick. There's a race in the book that I'm writing called the Eshi. They are similar to dwarves in some respects, but they don't have beards, and they live in underground caverns and caves and things like that, similar to what you remember for dwarves in the Middle Earth style of books. And they use edged weapons, the same as dwarves do, like axes and swords and things like that. But when you're underground, you don't go around swinging an axe or a blade if you're in like a cave, because you hit the walls, you're going to dull it up real good. So they use these suckers instead. Called a mine clearing tool. They take this down there and clear out any monsters and things like that that they find deep down in the mines. And this little Tagua nut comes in handy for distraction. Some of the beasts that they're going to come up against will focus on looking at the light, the little beasties, as well as it just helps them light the way. So it's a spell. You've got some spell casting ability with that through the Tagua nut. You can cast a couple different light spells, if you will. through that end. And then you've obviously got your beastly head for bashing in skulls. Not a toy, by the way. You don't want to be hitting folks with this. You will send them to the hospital and or the morgue. So, but in the end, this turned out really well. I'm actually quite pleased with it. It's going to be a nice little weapon. I'll put it up for sale on Etsy. Somebody wants to go check that out, please do. I'd love to sell it. So we're going to be working on another video here in just a little while. Get out how to make a sheath video. I'm working on a knife called the Tulip. It's just a small little pink handled knife with a tulip shaped handle. But I'll have that video out. It's going to be more of a tutorial instead of this one, which was more of just a watch the project video. I try and give you guys pointers and tell you about the things that I'm doing, but this video is not really a tutorial, as you can tell. So it's more of just for fun to see the process for this mace. But the how to make a sheath video coming up will be a tutorial. I'm going to walk you through step by step a lot of different things and get you set up there. And in fact, I'll give you a small sneak peek of some of the things that I'll be saying in that next video. But thanks for coming out. Thanks for watching. And I'll see you guys next time. But before you go, take a look at this. Just a quick screenshot of what I was doing, putting this video together. There was a lot of clips for this video, so it was pretty fun. But and I wanted to give you guys the sneak peek for the next video. I did already record the first couple parts of it, and this screenshot here lets you know some of the materials that you're going to need. If you're planning on making a sheath and following the tutorial through, this will give you an opportunity to go get those materials before we get started. So there you go. Thanks again. You guys make sure and subscribe to the channel. Come follow me on Facebook and things like that, and we'll catch you guys real soon.